Hello, I'm Professor McCoy, and today I want to talk about a series of degrees of different ways we can address ethical culpability. So ethical culpability is a combination of causal responsibility and moral responsibility. And so that is to say that someone is morally culpable, the other terminology you'll find used for this is that an action is what's called imputed to someone. That is to say they're morally and causally responsible for an action. Now, why I'm in the car for this, which is a little abnormal for me, is not because I'm going to be talking about how they ruined one of my favorite comic book characters. Maybe that's for another video. But because I'm going to be using a stock example for these different degrees of moral culpability. So the degrees that we're going to be going through here go from least responsible to most responsible, beginning with accidentally. You can do something accidentally, in which case you bear no responsibility for it. Now, don't tell my children this because I don't want them using this as an excuse, of course. And then next from that we have negligently, recklessly, knowingly, and then finally intentionally or deliberately. Now deliberately here is this is more the legal use of the term than the ethical use, because the ethical use of deliberately can apply to several of these that I'll address as we go through them. But to begin, we have when something is done accidentally. And this is something for which you have no moral culpability, because it is not your fault. It's not your doing. When you do something, or when something is done accidentally, and I use the passive voice there I use that carefully with that in mind, that is to say that the thing was not properly done by me. It was done involuntarily, typically out of ignorance. That is to say, when I do something by accident or accidentally, I didn't, in any proper sense, do it. It was something that happened as a result of what I chose to do, but I had no idea and could not have known that that would result. This is related to a concept I've talked about in other videos about culpability being mitigated due to ignorance. Right? Moral responsibility being not morally responsible for something because I was ignorant of what was actually happening or what was actually being done or the possible consequences, etc., etc. Now, a step up from this still relies upon ignorance. And this is when something is done negligently. To say that something is done negligently is to say that you still did not know what was being done or what could happen, but that you could have and should have. So an action is done negligently if I had no idea. I genuinely did not know that this bad result would occur, but that I was in a position to have a responsibility to know better. Now this is where we get into the car example. This is where I'm going to start bringing in an example to sort of sort these out. So suppose that I'm sitting here in my car in my driveway, and I go to back out of the driveway, but at some point I run over my neighbor's bicycle. So my neighbor kid left his bicycle behind my car. I go to back out of the driveway, and ba-bump, I run it over. All right. If I did so accidentally, that means that I could have no reasonable way of knowing that it was there. So suppose that I were to get into the car, it's tucked away under the wheel well in a way that I couldn't reasonably see it. I look behind me, I check my backup camera, I shift into reverse, switch the order of those, whatever, and I back up and I feel the bump, and I had no reasonable way of knowing that it was there. It was hidden, in other words, or it was put there while I wasn't looking, or something like that. Now, this is different from if I act negligently. Acting negligently is if, when I go to back up, I go check behind me, but suppose I neglect to look at my backup camera. And if I had looked, there would have been a bicycle in it. I would have seen the thing, and I could have avoided it. But I didn't. I did not look, but I could have, and I should have known. Now this is a case where I had no reason, I had no actual knowledge, right, that there was a bicycle behind my car to back over, but I could have known about it had I been more diligent, had I exercised more moral responsibility. And so what this says about negligent actions is, while I am not fully culpable for running over the bicycle in this case, I am still culpable to some degree, and that culpability is distant from the action. I'm not culpable for the action itself, because I did not in any way act towards running over the bicycle, because I didn't know about it. However, I was in this case responsible for being ignorant of the circumstances. I chose not to check the backup camera, not to, walk around behind the car to look for it, and if I had, I would have seen it. And so the ignorance in this case is my fault, meaning that my responsibility for the action is there. I do have moral responsibility for it, but it's a step separated, right? All right. Next up, we have actions which are taken recklessly. And this is a little bit more responsible. Unlike actions which are negligent, where I have no knowledge whatsoever of the consequence of the action, even though I could and I should, if I act recklessly, this is where I know that there is a risk of this bad thing happening. This would be, in the backing up over a bicycle case, this would be as if I know that my neighbor's kid often leaves his bicycle laying around in other people's yards. Sometimes I've even seen him leave it in my driveway. So I should know to check. But suppose I'm in a hurry. Suppose I really need to get to work today. I'm late for class already, and I didn't see it out there, but I know that there is at least some chance that the neighbor kid could have left his bicycle out there, and okay, I don't have time to check for it, so I guess I won't. I don't see it. I looked briefly. Perhaps I even looked in the backup camera, but I didn't actually have time to go check, even knowing that there's a risk. And so I decide to back up, and ba-bump, I run over the bicycle, knowing that it could be there, but not knowing that it is there. My knowledge here is limited, but not absent. You'll notice in the previous two, in accidental and in negligent, my knowledge is completely absent. I have no knowledge of the bicycle being there, certain or uncertain. If I'm acting recklessly, I know of the risk. I know that it could be there. I have an idea that it might be there. I have reason to think that it's there, but I don't have certainty. Or even, I could be acting recklessly if, suppose I see it there, say in my backup camera, and I think, I really don't have time to get out and move it. So what I'm going to try and do is I would need to start my car to use the example, pretend. I would need to cut the wheel strongly to one direction and try and back out around this bicycle. Now, I know that this being a minivan, the chances of me succeeding at that are hit or miss, let's say. I might still run it over. I might miss, especially because I'm working off of a backup camera, which doesn't have the greatest field of view. So I know that there is a significant risk of running over the bicycle, but I do it anyway. I take that risk for some other purpose. I've acted recklessly with respect to running over the bicycle. And so I'm slightly more responsible for running it over than I would have been had I been acting negligently or purely accidentally. All right. Next, we have acting knowingly. Now, knowingly, as you might guess based on the word, is when I know that running over the bicycle will be the result of my action, but I choose to do so anyway. Now, this is not at the top of the list. This is not maximal moral culpability, because there is something higher. This is intentional. I want to run through this one before I contrast the two, just to make sure we have it clear. So if I am to intentionally run over the neighbor's bicycle, that would be different from doing so knowingly. In both cases, I know that it's there. In both cases, I know that if I hit the gas pedal when my car is in reverse, I will run it over. But my intention is different. If I merely run over the bicycle knowingly, it is not the intention or the goal of my action. If I do so intentionally, running over the bicycle is what I am setting out to do. Okay. Now, these actions might look identical. Like all of these, frankly, might look identical. My reactions to them might be different. And my attitude towards them is very importantly different. My knowledge of the matter, my status of mind, my intentions. So let's come up with a couple of hypotheticals as to why I might do this knowingly versus why I might do this intentionally. If I were to knowingly run over the neighbor kid's bicycle, I might do so because, well, otherwise I'm going to be late for work. I don't have time to move it. And while it's unfortunate that I'm going to run over the bicycle and, damage it and potentially even damage my car, it's better to do that than to be late for work. If, on the other hand, I were to do so intentionally, my reason would have to be a reason for setting up running over the bicycle as a goal. This would be something like, if I decide that darn kid keeps leaving his bicycle in other people's yards too much and I have to teach him a lesson, so I'm going to run over his bicycle. Now, I wouldn't do that, but you can understand that kind of motivational structure, that kind of intentionality. It, even if it is not, morally upright, it is at least comprehensible. It's a way of forming the intention to run over this bicycle, say out of a somewhat perverted sense of justice, or even just out of a sense of spite. Right? We can imagine the neighbors of Dennis the Menace wanting to, ride over his bicycle. This is an outdated reference. This is from a newspaper comic back when those were a thing. Anyway, sorry. I'm sitting in the car recording a video. I'm feeling old. Regardless. The difference between acting intentionally versus acting knowingly can be a little bit difficult for the modern mind to comprehend, and that is because the modern mind doesn't think in terms of intentionality or teleology, in terms of ends. We think in terms of actions and results, or outcomes. Means of employing something, means of doing something, rather, and the outcomes of that action, rather than means and ends in the proper sense, what I am intending to do. So one way of distinguishing between these is that it is in terms of the reaction or the response to it. So if I act merely knowingly, if I'm going to, say, run over the bicycle, I have no intention to do so and I consider it regrettable, then if, perchance, the bicycle were laying just right to pass underneath my car and not get run over by the tires or any part of the undercarriage, then I would celebrate and head along my merry way and get to class hopefully on time. However, if I were to be intending to run over the bicycle and that were to happen and I were to miraculously miss the thing, if my intention were to run over the bicycle, what I would then do next is shift into drive and run it over again. Because my intention was to run it over. If I was merely to do it knowingly, that wasn't my goal, it wasn't my intention. And if it just so happens that it doesn't occur, I will not have failed. All right. So, hopefully this clarifies a few different ways that we can consider our actions and our culpability for those actions. A couple of other minor points to note. First of all, that all of these actions, anything above accidental at least, are at least minimally voluntary. They are, to use Ralph McInerney's standards, they are conscious, deliberate, free actions. I choose them in some sense. Even acts which are negligent, I have chosen to be ignorant of the situation in some way. Certainly with intentional, right, it is my intention to do it. It's conscious, I'm aware of it, I'm deliberating about it, I've chosen it, and I'm doing it freely. I'm absent any coercion or compulsion. But even the sort of middle ground ones, even if I'm acting recklessly, say, I choose to act knowing what the risks are. And because I'm doing so, this is still a voluntary action, so I'm at least minimally culpable for the action and for the outcome. The degree of culpability, and of course the share of culpability there, can be mixed. I can be less culpable. I can be culpable in a different way or in a different degree or that sort of thing. The other aspect of this is that this ties in with several other moral principles that I will be linking in the description of other things that I've talked about that have to do with this. This difference between intentionality and knowingly, as well as other lesser degrees, has a lot to do with other principles of ethical discernment, especially things like the principle of double effect, which I've discussed elsewhere. All right. Hopefully this has been a good clarification. Hopefully that we gathered something from this. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.